Hello everybody, I'm M, and welcome to Green Screen Entertainment. You know, humor is a very subjective thing. What one person might find funny, another person might not. It's basic comedy knowledge at this point. And comedy shows are pretty much no exception to this rule. Only thing is, with so many different kinds of comedy shows in a bunch of different settings, with a bunch of different jokes, with a bunch of different casts, it almost guarantees that there's something for everybody. So, today I'm going to be counting down my top 5 comedy shows.
Any rules for this list? Yes, actually. Live-action comedy shows only. Sketch comedy and cartoons will have their own separate videos. Also, this list will be 100% opinionated, so I don't expect anyone else's opinions to line up with mine whatsoever, so please keep that in mind. Other than that, there are no real boundaries for this list. If it made me laugh, it'll be on the list. Also, it should go without saying, minor spoiler alert for all the shows listed. There'll be varying degrees of spoilerhood between each entry, but spoilers nonetheless. Well, with all that said, this is my top 5 comedy shows. Let's get started. But before we get to the list proper, here's an honorable mention. And that honorable mention is Gilligan's Island. Coming to you live all the way from the middle of nowhere, this one was considered for the list more out of nostalgia than anything, though it is genuinely funny when it wants to be. Starting in September of 1964, this was a show about a group of 7 castaways: Gilligan, Skipper, Professor, Mr. and Mrs. Howell, Ginger, and Mary Ann. Every episode is a different sort of escape the deserted island attempt, ranging from various rafts and signals to repairing an honest-to-goodness satellite, which often results in, and is thwarted by, some comical situation. It's honestly amazing that they managed to create so much variety, given that there really isn't much that comes to mind when I think of deserted island other than Get Home. Yet, they still managed to make this interesting. Props to the writers for that. These people become like a family after a while, bonding over their circumstances, and the chemistry between a lot of the characters is really entertaining.
Well, Gilligan, don't let it bite you when you take the hook out.
There are 2 reasons that Gilligan's Island didn't make the list proper, though. The first is that there's usually a sense of urgency with this sort of stranding plot. The issue here comes into play when you realize that the island has everything they could possibly need to survive, and the fact that all of their escape attempts end up getting botched in some form or fashion. So I would have to wonder why they would even bother to try and leave after the first 4 or 5 attempts. The second reason is that the show is pretty formulaic. The plot of each episode is as follows: a brief skit with Gilligan and one other character doing a routine task on the island, then something is brought up that could be a potential escape or danger, though it's usually the former. The plot then forms around this new point with physical comedy and a few verbal jokes whenever the opportunity presents itself, until it disappears from the island somehow. The show's premise of getting off the island, which is present in every episode, gets a teeny bit boring after the first season, but not so boring that they can't spice things up with scientifically impossible things, slapstick, and some incredible chemistry between the characters. So, yeah, honorable mention it is. And with that, on to the list proper. Number 5, The Red Green Show. Beginning in the 90s, The Red Green Show is a show primarily focused around, well, Red Green, played by Steve Smith, and his nephew Harold, played by somebody I couldn't be bothered to look up.
The show is basically a collection of skits, with one of Red's stories starting off the episode, and becoming the connecting thread through the whole show, along with Handyman Corner, pretty self-explanatory, ditto with Mail Call and Adventures with Bill, with a few other skits mixed in here and there. Of course, the fun part about this is the show itself is a show. I feel like I should explain that a little more.
Unlike future entries on the list, the premise of this show is Red and his nephew Harold are up at a place called Possum Lodge and decide to create a TV show, of which Red is the star. So it's quite literally a show within a show that managed to go on for 300 episodes over a whopping 15 seasons. I'm not sure I know of any other shows that have gone on for that long. skits primarily revolve around wildlife, tools, and the many activities associated with the great outdoors, such as rolling your buddy down the hill in a set of homemade tire snowshoes. It's a lot of fun, and Red's old, maybe a little too wise for his own good personality is a lot of fun to watch.
Have you seen these fancy exhaust pipes they have? It's made of steel, but you can bend it any way you want. It's strong and flexible, kind of like a middle-aged man.
And his chemistry with Harold is okay.
Do I look normal to you, Uncle Red? You know, sometimes you just make it too easy for me.
The other characters are generally pretty good too. Ranger Gord's a lot of fun, Dalton works off of Red pretty well, Noel the security guy is enjoyable, and of course Bill, who got his own segment, is just a gas and a half. The show lands at number 5, however, because compared to the other shows on the list, it's fairly formulaic. It usually just starts with an opening at Possum Lodge before transitioning to another one of the same segments, usually with a transition card that, while it does change between seasons, does get repetitive with its structure. And I can safely say that I do not like Harold. He does have some legitimately funny lines from time to time, but just the way he's played up as a living nerd stereotype really gets on my nerves. Nothing against the actor personally, I'm sure he was just doing his best, but it's just not my cup of tea. But formulaic doesn't necessarily equal bad. Sometimes it's nice to know what's coming, so you can know what parts of the show to look forward to. So, with its decent writing and structure, likable characters, mostly, and well-chosen setting, The Red-Green Show makes it to number 5.
And now for the next entry, we've got something for you all the way from 1965. It's Wait a minute. 1960? That can't be right. Wow. This show is almost 60 years old. Well, number 4 is Get Smart, I guess.
Get Smart is a show about the bumbling, yet lovable, and surprisingly competent spy Maxwell Smart, played by Don Adams, and his partner Agent 99, played by Barbara Feldon. There's a massive variety of plots due to the amount of missions Control sends the duo on through the 5 seasons of this show's run, ranging from tennis to the Chinese laundry to a desert island. They must have the best travel agents in the known universe to get so many places in 5 seasons. Now, during its time, the show only had practical effects to work with, but for what they were, at the time, they were decent. Most of the time, you can see the hand! It was a lot more ambitious and polished with its effects overall than, say, Gilligan's Island or other shows of its time, which is a little surprising considering what it had to work with. On a different note, the show was also released during the spy craze of the 60s, with shows like Mission Impossible and the James Bond movies being all the rage. And its spoofs on spy tropes, such as everything being a complete secret from the average person, really helped it stand out from the other shows of its time. Also, for all the Looney Tunes-esque slapstick, there's a fair amount of entirely verbal jokes in here that are actually pretty decent. Like this one from Season 3.
What was that, Max?
The firing squad again. I've heard of a population explosion, but this is ridiculous.
The thing that I've noticed with a lot of comedy shows is that they tend to stick to one form of comedy or the other, slapstick or verbal sketch. But when they try the other, it mostly flops. Sure, there are elements of each in the other, but when they focus on mainly the one type of comedy, the moments of the other type tend to fall flat or are simply forgotten about. For example, the original Looney Tunes had both slapstick and verbal jokes, but since the slapstick and physical comedy was present and so much more emphasized upon, almost nobody remembers the Looney Tunes for the verbal side of things. Get Smart, on the other hand, has a wide range of both physical and verbal comedy that really allows both to mesh together nicely without necessarily clashing with one another. The characters are a treat to watch as well, and thoroughly entertaining. From Max's almost childlike innocence and wisecracks to the Chief's resigned attitude, it's a varied cast of characters with a villain of the week type of setup that almost guarantees that there'll be something for everybody in such a large rogues gallery. My personal favorite antagonists of the show are Siegfried and Starker, mainly because Siegfried's seriousness somehow ends up being more over the top than Starker, who's supposedly the funny man of the duo.
And Siegfried flies home victoriously. Starker is an der Gleise from Bidon. Yeah.
I won't go too in-depth in case you want to find this show for yourself. All 5 seasons are on DVD at your local record or movie shop. But to say that the series cast got colorful over the years would be a massive understatement.
It was so memorable, it even got its own movie adaptation in the 2000s, which was... It was okay as far as action flicks go, but as adaptations go, it was just straight up awful. But yeah, bad movie adaptations aside, Get Smart is an admittedly dated, but still fun show. For its characters, its writing that hits the mark every time, and for its really good sets. And that's why Get Smart lands it on number 4 on this list. Now presenting the Geek and Prankster Society, complete with pop culture and sci-fi references that still somehow manage to make me laugh.
Big Bang Theory is a show about 4 scientists and the average girl across the hall, though that changes as 2 of the scientists get girlfriends. It's very much a mixed bag, but one thing I admire about this show and the later 2 entries on this list is that it's successful at telling both an A and a B story without making it feel too crowded in the confines of a given episode. Sure, one plotline often tends to take precedence over the other, typically the one in the title, but it never feels like there's too much going on in one episode. I haven't seen a whole lot of the show past season 3 yet, but I really like what I've seen so far. It's pretty fun. I find the majority of the characters to be pretty relatable. I too am into a lot of nerdy and geeky subjects that this bunch is into, so hearing the occasional joke targeted at geeks is nice, as opposed to other shows where I've seen the geeks be the butt of everybody else's jokes. Looking at you, Harold. Each member of the main cast, from Sheldon to Raj to Penny, has managed to get a few laughs out of me, which is something I can safely say hasn't been achieved by the previous entries. Sure, Sheldon can be insufferable when he isn't genuinely funny, and the writing is as mismatched as the characters sometimes, but I still find it in myself to enjoy it a lot more.
We're here to see Kuthra Polly, not kill Batman.
The effects and the sets are pretty good as well, with the cinematography making the fourth wall seem like it's really there in any given scene. And the construction and the acting work really well to make it believable to the point where I can actually see these places being real. For example, I could really see Leonard and Sheldon's apartment being a real geek den, with everything that's on the walls, shelves, and everywhere else. I mean, yeah, it's enormous as apartments go. Seriously, look at all that floor space! If they can afford an apartment like that, they must be rich or something. But if you can suspend your disbelief a little at the details, it's a good show. On a related note, for a show that makes as many references as it does, none of the pop culture and geeky references ever really feel out of place in the show. They always make every little detail throughout the script have a payoff and work into the show somehow. It's really entertaining. And did I mention it made me laugh a lot more than the previous entries? Seriously, Sheldon's attempts at speaking Mandarin Chinese were some of the heartiest laughs I have had in a long time.
Crazy man. Call the police.
So, with its mostly likable cast, with its decent writing, sets, yeah, this show earns itself a spot at number 3.
I think you Canadians in the crowd can see what's coming next.
Coming to you live from 40 kilometers in the middle of nowhere, in the farming town of in the farming town of Dog River, is the top comedy in Canada, Corner Gas. Now, a show set in a small town in Saskatchewan, that sounds pretty boring on the surface. But if you actually take the time to sit down and watch the show, you'll soon learn not to judge a show solely by its premise. Like the previous entry, Corner Gas excels at telling both an A story and a B story in the same show without anything really feeling too crowded. Even having them intersect at points usually closer to the end, to resolve it. With my favorite example of this being in the episode The Littlest Yarbo, where Hank, the town idiot, is convinced he's met the littlest hobo from the TV show The Littlest Hobo, which ended a long time before this show even began airing. While at the same time, the new Dog River Fire Department is being introduced, and promptly leaves the show after this one episode. Seeing this episode for the first time, I really couldn't figure out how these two storylines could resolve each other, but the show managed to surprise me and still make it work.
On a different note, there's a principle that's known simply as Chekhov's gun. The idea that every story element has to be necessary and have a big payoff later on. Cornergas takes this element and runs with it so hard, it makes mystery novels jealous.
Plot structure aside, though there is a lot to delve into, the characters are the main thing that keeps the show interesting. The main character is Brent Leroy, played by Brent Butt. Wow, no wonder he wanted to change his name for this show. But at the same time, what's a good main without a good supporting cast to go with it? From Brent's calm sarcasm to Hank's utter incompetence to Oscar's cranky craziness, there's a lot of differing personalities, and while each one of them is funny on their own, they work comedic wonders when they bounce off each other, acting so believably you almost believe they're real, definable people, instead of all the same person with a different coat of paint. My personal favorite interactions are between Brent and Oscar, with Oscar usually taking the borderline crazy route while Brent just calmly replies with the sort of tired, snappy remarks that you would expect from someone who owns a gas station in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, this is your big way of getting back at me for jackass.
Yeah, it's got kind of a nice ring to it, doesn't it, Hammerhead?
As opposed to The Big Bang Theory, who has a group of similar characters who have different traits when compared to one another, Corner Gas's cast is completely different from a wide range of ages and backgrounds, even heights, practically guaranteeing that there'll be at least one character out of the lot you like. That goes for the comedic writing as well. Just like Get Smart, there's a good balance of physical and verbal comedy that manages to mesh together pretty well without seeming like it conflicts with each other. Of course, the townspeople's imaginations play a large part in allowing the physical gags to happen. For example, the pilot episode alone had multiple sick burns, or scorches as everyone in this show calls them.
Hey Wanda, what do you know about this Lacey person?
I know she doesn't have cataracts, so you don't have a chance.
Scorch.
Ow!
And a joke that revolved entirely around throwing watermelons. See, they balance with different kinds of comedy without distracting or taking away from the other one too much. Of course, again, their imagination plays a big part in these scenarios taking place, allowing for memories or hypothetical scenarios to play out with no consequence to the story overall, aside from giving birth to an idea here and there.
Corner Gas has a good setting, a memorable cast, and jokes that land almost every time. It's charming, it's funny, and it's my second favorite comedy show of all time. So between spies, a lodge in the middle of nowhere, a service station in the middle of nowhere, and a group of physicists in California, we have a mobile army surgical hospital in the middle of the Korean War. Well, nobody ever said I didn't have a varied taste in comedy.
I'm willing to bet that a lot of you didn't really see this one coming. Compared to the other shows on this list, I was introduced to this one fairly late in life, when some withdrawn DVDs were found at the library. They were bought, taken home, and subsequently watched, and I laughed my lips off at it. Set in 1950, to start with, it follows the stories of a group of doctors and nurses at a mobile army surgical hospital, the 4077th MASH for short. Based off the movie by the same name, which was based on a book by the same name, it went for a more lighthearted and silly tone that was just a treat to watch compared to the nihilistic brand of humor that the movie was known for. The antics of Hawkeye Pierce and his sidekick, Trapper John McIntyre, especially when they were pranking their uptight and GI tent mate, Frank Burns, were my favorite thing to watch, and the only thing I would watch for a time. It ran for 11 seasons, which I've only seen 10 of so far, and it was really successful. I might do a video essay on it in the future, who knows. There were some changes to the cast as the show went along, Trapper and Henry being replaced by BJ and Potter in Season 4, and Frank being replaced by Winchester in Season 6, but they were no less entertaining. Heck, they might have even been more entertaining than their Season 1 to 3 counterparts, with Winchester being more of a worthy foe than Frank the Fall Guy. And once again, like the previous 2 entries, MASH managed to establish a balance between physical comedy and wordplay that really resonated with me and many, many others before my time. It was a very smartly written show, with comebacks and snappy remarks around every corner for every situation, most of them coming from our lead duo.
Couple of cutie pies, ain't you?
Thank you.
Who's your second in command?
Major Frank Burns, MD. Manic depressive. It's an honorary title.
Of course, there were several standard procedures like operating and dealing with various duties around camp, but there were also crazier scenarios like trapping Frank in a foxhole with a jeep, or one of Klinger's many attempts to get out of the army via Section 8, discharge via account of insanity. And while the show is comedic in nature, and it was amazing in that regard, don't get me wrong, it was never afraid to go into the more serious aspects of their setting, the Korean War. And on that front, it delved into quite a few topics, like the toll that war takes on the mind and the body, or how different people react to or deal with war. Sometimes the episodes lead more towards funny and play it up for jokes, and other times they're more serious, and they do a good job at both. And that's what makes MASH different from other shows of its kind. It knows when to be funny and when to be serious.
That's what makes MASH different from other shows of its kind. It's not afraid to be serious or go into the depths of the more serious moments. Unlike other shows like Full House that try to be funny no matter what kind of lesson or moral they're trying to teach.
On a different note, the characters are just a treat to watch, from Hawkeye to Houlihan to Klinger to Frank to Radar to Winchester, and most of them, aside from Frank, all undergo some sort of substantial character growth by the end of the series, and it's really amazing to watch said growth as each character develops from their experiences. I'll make a full review or video essay of this series in the future, so for now, I'll leave you with this. MASH is a wonderful show, focused on comedy, but it's also insightful, with characters that are real people with highs and lows. And that's why MASH is my favorite comedy of all time.
And with all that said, that's why MASH is my favorite comedy show. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Heck, share this video around if you want, I don't care. So with all that said, this has been M from the Green Screen. Have a nice day.